studios in New York City. This is Charlie Rose.
Sophisticated filtration of information and manipulation of public opinion preceded the invasion in Iraq. Luckily, this time we managed to avoid an international escalation of the Syrian conflict.
Vitaly Churkin is here. He is Russia's ambassador to the United Nations. Russia's playing an increasingly prominent role on the world stage. Along with the United States, it brokered the ongoing Geneva II conference, which aims to end the Syrian civil war. The country is also a key player in nuclear negotiations with Iran. Closer to home, President Vladimir Putin recently bailed out Ukraine's embattled government, a move seen as an attempt to increase Moscow's influence. The eyes of the world are on Russia as it prepares to host the Winter Olympics in Sochi next month. As concerns mount over terror threats, President Obama has offered the Kremlin full security assistance. For all those reasons, I'm pleased to have Vitaly Churkin back at this table. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good to be back.
Let's start first at the G2 conference. We have seems to be a dispute among some people over the objective of the conference, and certainly what it means for President Bashar al-Assad. Where is Russia on this question?
Well, the objective of the conference is to end the crisis in Syria, to end the fighting, to end the killing. And for that objective to be attainable, almost a year and a half ago, they negotiated the so-called Geneva Communique. And now it is regarded as the basis of the negotiations. But it's a very complex document. The main idea of the document is that the two parties should get together and discuss transition to a future Syria where everybody would be comfortable with, comfortable to live, all ethnic and religious groups which exist in that country. So this is where we're coming from. As to specific issues, they need to be negotiated between the Syrian parties. And this particular matter of the future of President Assad is certainly a very complex and delicate and thorny issue. And the government is adamant that he should stay. The opposition is adamant that he should go. I think it's a very wise tactic which Lakhdar Brahimi is going to try to carry through
the UN
in the UN representative for the talks in his contacts with the parties, which have started today in Geneva, to try to find common ground on some issues first. Maybe those are going to be humanitarian issues, exchange of prisoners, access to some areas where humanitarian assistance has not come for a long time. Then, after they find common ground on some of those issues, they will keep discussing other matters, including forming a transitional body with representatives of both sides. And then, hopefully, they will have a clearer understanding of where things can go in order to end conflict.
Okay. Here's what Secretary Kerry said. We see only one option, negotiating a transition government born by mutual consent. That means that Bashar al-Assad will not be part of that transition government.
Well, this is the understanding of the United States. The first part of the statement is of course, absolutely accurate because it's a quote from the Geneva Communique I referred to. The rest of it is not something which is said in the Geneva Communique about Bashar Assad. That issue was not directly addressed by the Geneva Communique, and obviously there is major difference between the two parties on that matter. So in order to have a realistic chance to move things forward, as I say, we believe that we need to tackle matters first where conceivably agreement can be reached between the government and the opposition.
President Assad said in a recent interview that the purpose of the conference should be to discuss ways to fight terrorism, and that it is totally unrealistic to think he'd share power with the exiled opposition.
You know, both the government and the opposition groups made some pretty tough opening shots as they were going into that conference. The opposition was saying that the first thing to be done is to make sure that Assad will go. The government responded, including President Assad, by very strong statements to the contrary. So this is something, I suppose, which could have been anticipated. But now the challenge is to try to make sure that they will find things to talk about and to agree on with the mediation of Lakhdar Brahimi.
There's also the introduction of these photographs of torture and killing, supposedly taken by someone who documented it, and then there are some official organizations that says they have verified them. Has your government Does it have a position on these photographs?
We have no idea. Of course, we heard the news, and it was rather strange that the announcement was made in a rather precipitous way on the eve of the conference. Obviously, there was a political agenda behind it, trying to create a certain atmosphere for the conference, maybe even to derail the conference. Fortunately, that has not happened. But you know, over the 3 years of the conflict, there has been a lot of manipulation of information and a lot of propaganda, disinformation. So this matter should be, first of all, very seriously investigated.
But I mean, it's exactly. These are very serious allegations of torture and death.
That's for sure.
With these awful photographs.
Well, no, this is awful photographs, and we know that.
So if they are true, if in fact these were crimes committed by the Syrian government, what's the conclusion therefore?
Well, we are all in the Security Council, all those countries who are participating in this effort to settle the crisis in Syria, we all believe that there should be no impunity. And in fact, the Geneva Communique does address that when the parties enter into the political settlement of the crisis, that there must be also effort to punish all those who may have been involved in committing various crimes in the course of the conflict. And it's clear that on both sides, some rather horrific things happened. Of course, lately, various terrorist groups operating in Syria have been particularly notorious in committing mass executions, murder, etc., etc. So all those things need to be investigated. That's for sure.
And they're simply unacceptable on the part of anybody involved in the Syrian effort.
Absolutely.
You know, and you ought to find the facts and make sure that people pay for the price of doing that.
You're absolutely right. No impunity.
Okay. And also, whomever might have used gas.
Gas, we had long discussions in the Security Council. There was a mission headed by Mr. Sahlström, put together by the Secretary General of the United Nations. And the last discussion we had was in Security Council on December 16, after the final report of this mission. And we believe that we proved quite conclusively, beyond reasonable doubt, that those were opposition groups who committed those provocations.
August 21st.
On August 21st and also on March 19. Two major
The United
cases.
States believes conclusively that the Syrian government did
actually, they didn't even argue against the arguments which we presented. The United States made the statement without substantiating it by anything. We proved
but
beyond
you're
reasonable...
not saying that the United States government does not believe the Syrian government did it. Are you?
I think, well, you may have read the famous articles by Seymour Hersh investigating this whole thing. I don't know what the United States government believes or not. I know that
what do they say to you?
Investigation, they say that it was the Syrian government, but they don't give any proof of their allegations.
Well, they say that. I would assume they believe it.
Well, it's a complicated world. You know that it's a complicated world. You know, lately those people who claimed initially that it was the Syrian government, obviously and quite visibly lost any conviction in that. So let me repeat: we proved beyond reasonable doubt not only that the opposition did it, but that the Syrian government could not have done it on August 21 in particular, because simply the few days preceding August 21, they were not mixing sarin. If you don't mix sarin, you cannot use it.
Sarin gas is...
sarin gas, it's a very volatile substance. So you have to prepare it a few days before you use it. So it was a lengthy, a 6-page statement I made is on the site of our mission. You can read it, and I think it proves quite conclusively that they couldn't have done it. And incidentally, on March 19, they were the ones who immediately demanded investigation. And UK, France, and the United States were the ones who prevented that investigation from taking place on March 19, the first serious use of chemical weapons. So, you know, if you look in this entire tragic story, if you believe that it was the Syrian government who did it, then there are so many contradictions and inexplicable things. If you come to the conclusion that it was the opposition, then everything becomes obvious and clear what actually have happened. Red lines. The opposition wanted the red lines to be crossed.
It ended up that Russia stepped forward and said, we can make a deal here. We can get those chemical weapons somehow out of Syria. Where are we on that? And has the Syrian government done everything it can, and has it met the timetable, and has it done all that it can to get the chemical weapons out of Syria?
I think everybody, including this joint mission which we have now between the United Nations and the Organization on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, who are conducting the actual program, They are generally satisfied with the cooperation of the Syrian government. The Syrian government provided all the necessary information. The Syrian government put the entire operation in place. The entire international operation is now in place as well. The American vessel on which the actual destruction of chemicals is going to take place is on the way to its location, which it has not reached yet. So I think that things are moving ahead. And
by what date will all the chemical weapons be removed?
They are supposed to be destroyed by mid-2014, by July 1st of this year.
Okay. Let me just go back to the pictures for one second. Be clear that I understand, because of how firm you are about the gas, and there's a basic difference between your government and the United States on that, and you and Secretary Kerry. There is also this, if in fact it turns out that those awful crimes of which the photographs represent were committed by the Syrian government, will that affect your support of the Assad government?
No,
will you stop supporting him if you found out that that government committed those crimes against its people?
No impunity to those who committed crimes. It needs to be investigated. If those crimes have been committed, we need to know who exactly committed those crimes. You know, you mentioned the crimes which were committed by the opposition. Somehow it did not deter many countries who are supporting the opposition from continuing that support.
Interesting you say that, because I mean, it depends on what part of the opposition has so many faces.
Yes, exactly.
You know, I mean, your government is very upset about the part of the opposition too. On the others, you have less concern about, right? I mean, some are much more radical, fundamental jihadists.
Some of the terrorist organizations,
right,
absolutely.
Exactly.
Terrorist organizations, we're very concerned about them. That's why we insisted that they should not be invited to the Geneva II conference, and they weren't. But the other parts of the opposition we have dealt with, we are prepared to continue dealing with. Mr. Jarba, who is representing the National Coalition, who came to Montreal, and now who is in Geneva, Foreign Minister Lavrov met with him. So we're engaging the opposition. We have tried to engage the opposition all along in the course of the conflict in order to bring the two parties together.
You're Russia's ambassador to the United Nations. Your Secretary General said, we're inviting the Iranians. And then they took back the invitation. What happened?
You know, I believe that Secretary General, I'm saying it kind of very personally, was misled by some people, and they were not necessarily the Iranians.
They might have been the Iranians.
Well, the Iranians, he was not very happy with the Iranians, but the Iranians were not the only people who may have misled him.
Well, who are these other people?
Well, those who were putting pressure on the Secretary General not to invite Iran. But
is it the United States that put the pressure on
this? I think this is behind us, and this is not such a big deal, frankly, because in diplomacy things happen. Things happen. So I wouldn't exaggerate the importance.
Have to be there to be present. Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't exaggerate the importance of this episode. What is important is what the Secretary General, actually his spokesperson, said about the participation of Iran. It was a very carefully written and very cleverly written statement. It said the Secretary General does not expect Iran to participate in the one-day Montreal event, which means that the Secretary General kept open the door for Iran's participation in the political process.
What has to happen for Iran to be able to participate? Do they have to agree to certain conditions of the conference?
You know, that was, I think the whole thing was completely artificial, because, you know, there is a written invitation, the text of which has been agreed between United States, Russia, and the United Nations, a written invitation referring to the Geneva communique, which the Secretary General sent to all the participants in the conference. If you accept the invitation, by implication, you accept the conditions which are there. So Iranians were prepared to accept that invitation.
But then when they asked, did they accept the conditions, they refused to say so.
No,
but wait, I mean, you're saying it's implied that they accept the conditions. Yet when asked if they agreed with the conditions, they said no.
Listen, no, they did not say no. What
did they say?
They said they were prepared to come without preconditions. But essentially, you know, all other participants, some of them have interpreted the Geneva communique completely differently from what is actually said in the Geneva communique. But they were not required to swear in blood that you know, they were not going to depart from the Geneva communique. That requirement was only made exclusively of the Iranians.
Secretary Kerry suggested, you know, they have troops on the ground in Syria, and therefore they shouldn't necessarily be.
The United States was very reluctant about Iran, but I believe, I have reason to believe that the United States also understands that the Iranians need to participate in this process. And it's very encouraging, let me say, that in the interview which was shown yesterday on American television, Mr. Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, did indicate that Iran Iranians are prepared to participate in this political process, which I think everybody is interested in happening.
Yeah, they've got obviously a vested interest in what happens and been strong in their support of President Assad. So I want to come to the nuclear negotiations in just a moment. The finance minister of France, Mr. Fabius, said that
foreign minister,
I'm sorry, I said finance minister, foreign minister, that if in fact this conference fails, it will accentuate a crisis.
Which conference? The conference on Syria?
Conference, yeah, the Geneva conference. Yeah.
Well, of course, if the conference fails, then the crisis probably is going to deepen even further.
He said if it fails, it will be a real crisis, is exactly what he said.
I cannot comment on the foreign minister of France, but I think there is a real crisis. There is a crisis enough. But of course, if the conference were to fail, we'll have to start looking for some other approach to the entire problem.
Most people that I know or talk to, analysts but not participants, believe it will not be successful. Do you believe it will be successful, and what will have to happen to declare it a success?
Well, there is a chance. There is a chance, and there is a hope. A chance, a hope.
Small
of course,
chance? Small chance.
I cannot trade the chance. The task is very daunting. It's very daunting. We all agree that it will take time, that it will require continued hard commitment from all those who can contribute positively. We're encouraged that Russia and the United States work very closely. Sergei Lavrov and John Kerry, talking almost every day on the phone. They've had like 24 meetings, etc., most of them on Syria. So there are some ingredients which make us hope that it can be a success. But obviously the obstacles are enormous. And there are some players who don't want to see any settlement at all, who want Syria to disintegrate, who want Syria to become a hub of international terrorism. So we are working, trying to overcome some pretty tough obstacles. It's a very good example, which you alluded to briefly, is this deal on the nuclear program of Iran, where the parties were coming from completely different directions. The United States and Iran has had a history of 40 years of animosity, but in a certain configuration, diplomatic configuration, progress was made and this agreement was achieved.
On that agreement, it's P5+1, which includes Russia's permanent member of the Security Council, right? And the one is Germany, right? So those negotiations have produced this agreement. That means the United States and Russia see this exactly the same?
Well, we contribute, all of us. I mean, the United States has its own perspective, but the important thing is that this mechanism of 6 has been working very well. They produced joint positions. They were able to talk with the Iranians in order to bring those common positions across and to have the Iranians accept those common positions. And as a result, this agreement was concluded in November, and now they are going to move ahead to the definitive and final agreement, which will resolve the problem.
We've had several interesting statements coming up. First of all, President Rouhani is at Davos and basically reiterated once again that Iran does not want nuclear bombs, and at the same time reiterated that Iran wants the opportunity to create the peaceful use of nuclear energy.
Yes.
Correct?
Exactly.
Mr. Zarif, however, says that it is not true that Iran has agreed to dismantle centrifuges, has agreed to reduce to 5% the amount of enriched uranium. He said, we did never agree to that. So you're here, and you can tell me whether they agreed to that or not.
I watched this interview of Minister Zarif very carefully yesterday, and I think it's being sensationalized in the United States in a negative way, whereas in fact it was a very positive statement.
How is sensationalizing?
No, let me explain. I think the very important thing he said, he complained about some terms which are being used by the United States in order to describe the deal, which are not actually used in the document. But he said at the same time, let's not engage in that. Let's not engage in that argument. Let us implement the agreement we reached. This is what he said.
Well, how can you? How can you implement an agreement you reached if you differ over the agreement you reached?
The difference is, on both sides, of course, they try to embellish their achievement. So the American officials sometimes use certain terms which the Iranians, I understand, are not happy about, because they are not happy because those terms are not actually used in the agreement. But the agreement is completely clear. Moreover, there was an expert discussion on how to implement the agreement, which was also successfully concluded. And on January 20, they started implementing that agreement. So the thing is not to engage in those empty discussions and arguments about who is going to do what is absolutely clear. Now the thing is to implement it, and then to move on to the second stage of negotiations and to agree on definitive solution to this problem.
At what point will they begin to reduce the sanctions?
I mean, it's all in the agreement. They are already reducing some unilateral sanctions. It's all carefully described in the agreement in minuscule detail. So the thing to do is to implement the things which have been agreed and which have been reflected in that agreement.
Everything we have talked about this evening, there is a difference among the parties as to what the deal is. At everything about photographs, about what the agreement says, about what Assad has done.
Charlie, this particular case with Iran, well, first of all, there is, I think, a document in Geneva last November clear enough. And then there is a technical document which was additionally negotiated by experts with the Iranians, specifying in step by step, minute by minute, you know, centrifuge by centrifuge, what exactly they need to do and how. So there is completely no ambiguity.
Then tell me in your words, are they required to dismantle centrifuges?
Well, let me put it this way. If the word dismantle is not used in the agreement, then they are not required to dismantle. But there are certain things like they are required to diffuse some of the uranium which they enrich to 20%. Everything is in the agreement. So they need to do what is written in that agreement. So will they not have uranium enriched at 20% if this agreement is made? You know, I don't remember the exact terms, but let me reiterate. Everything is spelled out in incredible detail. It's actually very rare that agreement of this sort are written in such detail. Everything is clear. A roadmap is there. The parties need to implement it. And incidentally, also, there is going to be a special commission, I believe, or whatever, between the six and IAEA and Iran and IAEA, which is going to observe the implementation. So it's not something where you rely on the Iranians or trusting the Iranians. The whole thing is going to be observed by IAEA, and special budget for IAEA to carry out this task.
The Olympics are going to take place in Sochi. Are you concerned about security?
Of course.
Are you open to America's offer to assist?
Well, first of all, I don't know if assist is a proper word.
What word would you use?
Well, we have been cooperating with cooperation with American experts on anti-terrorism. There have been extensive discussions, and not just with the Americans. I mean, the British have been sharing their experience and others. So, I mean, as I think the spokesman of the White House said yesterday or the day before yesterday, any major event these days requires serious effort to ensure that there are no terrorist attacks, and Olympic Games is such a major event.
You referred, I think, to Jay Carney, but my impression is, and I've been talking about this in the morning for a number of programs, is that the concern has ratcheted up of security at these and the secureness of the facility, and we have some people who are suggesting that they intend to commit terrorist acts.
When there are major events, there are always people who intend to commit terrorist acts. You remember when in London they had Olympics, they put up anti-aircraft guns on the roofs in London. You know, nothing should be left to chance. And obviously, we are not leaving anything to chance, and all the measures are taken by Russia, and including our cooperation with others who are interested in making sure that nothing goes wrong at the Sochi Olympics.
One of the people that they point their finger at is Doku Umarov, right? Is he alive?
There were reports that he may have been killed, but that has not been confirmed yet.
Yeah. So the important thing here is that you take seriously this and you assure those Olympians that they will be secure and their families who come to these games will be secure, and that the Russian government will cooperate with everybody to make sure that happens.
We are cooperating with everybody. We are taking all the efforts which can be taken in order to make that a secure Olympics. Yes.
Let me talk about Edward Snowden for a moment. He's in your country. President Putin said he's perfectly free to go, even to the Olympics, if that's what he wants to do. What is your understanding of this charge by Mike Rogers that somehow your government was involved early with him and that there were meetings that took place?
It's a fantasy. It's anybody can have his own like nightmare or dream. I don't know what this gentleman where he's coming from, but it's certainly not true. It's simply not true.
And as far as you know, and you would know, Mr. Snowden did not give anything in terms of the kinds of files that he brought with him to any official in the Russian government.
President Putin said that repeatedly, that we're not working with Edward Snowden.
But he hasn't given you a computer, he hasn't given you any of his files.
Source of intelligence, and from you should ask Mr. Snowden. He has been giving various things to all sorts of people. I mean, the media said they published just 1% of what he gave them. So, I mean...
Yeah, well, that's The Guardian said that. They've only published 1% of what he...
Yeah, exactly. So it's the question you should ask him, who has been giving
Are you aware of whether he has these documents and secrets with him in Russia?
I have no idea. I don't know.
Well, I can't imagine that your government wouldn't want to know that.
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe we know enough already.
One other big issue for Russia, and then some overall questions. The Ukraine. Here's the conventional wisdom. The United States, Russia did not want to see Ukraine sort of move towards the European Union. And so therefore it spent a ton of money to rescue its economy and its energy supply in order to prevent that. Correct?
No, not really, no. Ukraine, of course, is very important to us, much more important than to the United States or to European Union. It was sort of...
Because it used to be part of the
because it is a part of our history, common history, which is over 1,000 years history. This is why. I mean,
that's an interesting point. Is it your wish and President Putin's wish and Prime Minister Medvedev's wish to restore the Soviet Union?
No, it's not. It's not. We are realists. We believe that economic integration is important in our part of the world. Like it's important for other parts of the world, so why not for our part of the world? So we have created this customs union with Belarus and Kazakhstan. We think that Ukraine will benefit if they were to work on integration with Russia and the customs union. We believe, and it's very important to understand that the future anyway is common economic space between the European Union and Russia and the customs unions, the whole thing. But we believe that under the current circumstances, and we were very clear about that, we're saying that it's, of course, the decision which Ukraine needs to make on their own. It's their sovereign decision. But this association agreement, which was offered by the European Union, would have catastrophic consequences for the economy of Ukraine. And that could have also negative influence, negative impact on Russian economy because of the way our two economies are integrated. But it was their sovereign decision to make.
Yeah.
And at the last moment, the Ukrainian authorities, maybe too late, they realized that what they were offered by the European Union was something which would bring about collapse of their economy. So they changed their mind. And as you pointed out correctly, we gave a credit to the Ukrainians, and
but most
made
people
some
don't believe
economic
they'll ever
arrangements.
be able to pay it back.
Well, it's a big country. We hope they will.
Yes, I'm sure you do. So here we have Russia and the United States. Because of this relationship between Mr. Lavrov and Secretary Kerry, Minister Lavrov and Secretary Kerry, Secretary Kerry being very active, Minister Lavrov having interest as well, cooperating. Does this signal somehow of a new era in cooperation between Russia and the United States?
It might be. I hope it will develop into that. But,
it has that possibility.
I hope so.
And what stands in the way of it?
Well, we'll still have some different interests. We still have things on where we have different attitudes. We still have not nearly enough economic relations that we need to have as two very large economies. So there are plenty of things which need to be done.
What would Russia like to see from the United States? More trade? More what else?
More trade and really being more serious about taking into account the interests of each other. I think that the Europeans have understood that in their bid to drag Ukraine into this association agreement, they were reckless. because they were putting their finger on something which was extremely sensitive both for Ukraine and for Russia. I personally do not see that from the United States these days. I think that the United States, unfortunately, is acting in a very provocative manner with regard to Ukraine.
How is that? What's provocative about what the United States has done?
Like trying to put pressure on the government, basically inciting violent acts.
You think the demonstrations in the streets of Kiev are because of the United States government?
Not because of the United States government. But when the government tries to take measures in order to prevent thugs from destroying downtown Kiev, right. And the United States says that the riot police should be withdrawn from downtown Kiev, how that could be viewed? Like threatening sanctions to place sanctions on government officials, or completely disregarding the acts of those people who are trying to destabilize the situation in Ukraine. This is I think, a very disconcerting policy. Well, first of all, it's a policy which seems to be regarding very lightly the interests of the Ukrainian people.
What is your government's position about gays in Russia?
No discrimination. We do not discriminate anybody. We do not differentiate among
But do you
people.
have laws that are not enforced?
No, we have a law about which there has been a lot of sort of talk, banning gay propaganda among minors, and propaganda of pedophilia and gay propaganda among minors.
Why do you associate those two things?
Well, those may be different things, but those are things which we see in some countries. We see in some countries.
That was what the president said, President Putin.
Exactly, yes.
It's about protecting children, but that's not what the issue of gay rights is about. It's not about pedophilia.
And this is not about gay rights. I mean, you're absolutely right. There is no discrimination in Russia. There is no discrimination of gays or on any other basis. And there is no difference between us and the United States on human rights. We believe that human rights should be upheld.
A significant the conventional wisdom is otherwise. I mean, as you know, the president has even spoken to his President of the United States. President of the United States President Obama has spoken to the idea, and saying, and that was one of the reasons he appointed some people to lead the delegation as his representatives.
The conventional wisdom in the United States is not always the conventional wisdom. It's very often unconventional wisdom.
Really?
Let me tell you.
So you're saying President Obama misunderstands the relation between what President Putin believes about gay rights?
Well, I don't know what exactly the understanding of President Obama is, but clearly this is an issue which has been inflated artificially for whatever political purposes.
But tell me what's not true. That's what I want to know.
That there is any discrimination of gays in Russia, without any danger of for gays in Russia. This is not true.
And there are no laws that are unenforced, which is a point some people make.
Unenforced. There are laws which, I mean, actually the question of are they enforced or not. There are laws against propaganda of law, which is there on the books. I don't know if it has ever been applied. Probably not. But there is such law, yes, which was adopted, I think, last spring by our parliament. But it has not created any discrimination for anybody.
How do you define propaganda?
You know that when you see it, to remember this famous expression.
Potter Stewart. About pornography.
Yes.
I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it, is what he said. So, as you look at things today, Russia is excited about this new, the Olympics, and it is said that President, you see numbers up between $50 and $100 billion.
Why are you so worried about it? We're not spending your money. No, actually, it's really, we have this discussion that it's inappropriate to try to count money in another person's pocket. And we keep asking, how much money you spend? How much money you spend?
I didn't even ask. My point was you spent a lot of money because these Olympics are important to you.
We spent a lot of money because we wanted to hold Olympic Games. Every 4 years there is a Winter Olympics.
Are you going?
Unfortunately not. Too much work in New York.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Pleasure to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Vitaly Churkin is Russia's ambassador to the United Nations. Back in a moment. Stay with us. We focus tonight on Turkey. Prime Minister Erdogan's government is being accused of corruption. Several ministers have resigned, and the cabinet has been reshuffled. Erdogan has called it a coup attempt by the judiciary. It is widely believed that followers of Fethullah Gulen are involved. He is a reclusive preacher residing in exile in the Poconos in Pennsylvania. Gulen and Erdogan have joined forces over the last decade as a series of trials reduced the political influence of the military. Many accuse the government of using the trials to curb the opposition. Joining me now from Washington, James Jeffrey. He is the former U.S. ambassador to Turkey and Iraq. Here in New York, Dexter Fulkins of the New Yorker magazine, Elmira Merasli. She is a fellow at the World Policy Institute. Lastly, on the phone from Istanbul is Benjamin Harvey. He is the Bloomberg bureau chief in Turkey. I am pleased to have each of them here. Ambassador, tell me what you think is happening at the moment in Turkey, and what does it mean?
First of all, what we're seeing is, as you said, a power struggle between the Gülenist faction, which is part of Erdogan's ruling AK party, and Prime Minister Erdogan himself. Many of the other institutions that have had a sort of independent or separate existence in a pluralistic system have been accommodated or otherwise shunted aside by Prime Minister Erdogan. He's got probably a majority of the population behind him, and he's doing his best to continue to expand his power, which is normal in any democratic system or any other system. The Gülenist people feel threatened, and they are reacting against this by having people in the administration, particularly the judiciary and police, unveil these